what if the reason you're procrastinating right now, like literally right this second, has absolutely nothing to do with time management?
Right, like what if it's not about your schedule at all?
Exactly. What if it has everything to do with the fact that your brain biologically views your future self as a complete stranger?
It's wild to think about. I mean, we've spent decades just aggressively treating the wrong disease,
Oh, completely.
using tools that actually make the underlying conditions so much worse.
Yeah, and nowhere is that misdiagnosis more obvious or honestly more painful than in the scenario we are going to unpack today.
Oh, yeah, the classic scenario.
Right, so I want to paint a picture for you, the listener, and I guarantee this is going to feel uncomfortably familiar.
I'm already stressed just thinking about it.
Right, so let's say it's Tuesday. It's exactly 4:00 p.m.
Okay.
and you have this massive, incredibly important report due on Friday morning. You have 3 full days.
Which is, I mean, mathematically speaking, that's an abundance of time.
It's a ton of time. It's more than enough time to not only finish the report, but to, do it exceptionally well, review it, hand it in with total confidence.
Sure.
And yet, what are you actually doing at 4 p.m. on Tuesday?
You are definitely not opening that document.
Not even close.
Yes.
You are suddenly, seized by this overwhelming urge to check your email for the 15th time in the last hour.
Even though you know literally nothing new has arrived.
Exactly. You're aggressively reorganizing your desk.
Yeah.
You're finding some antibacterial wipes and scrubbing down your
You have
keyboard.
that sudden urge to clean.
Right. You wander into the kitchen to make another cup of coffee that you don't even really want.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you are reading a completely unrelated article about, the history of the Roman aqueducts.
Which is fascinating, but not helpful.
Not helpful at all.
Oh, yeah.
Which leads to a video rabbit hole about ancient engineering. And then you decide, well, you know what I really need before I can possibly start working? I need a snack.
Of course,
Yeah.
the pre-work snack.
And all the while, you're sitting there doing absolute nothing on the actual report, feeling this crushing, simultaneous weight of guilt and anxiety.
Just a heavy, heavy feeling.
Yeah, but you are completely physically paralyzed. You just cannot start.
I mean, the statistics on this are just staggering.
Really? How bad is it?
Well, the latest research indicates that roughly 20% of adults, so like 1 in 5 people walking around today, are chronic procrastinators.
Wow. 1 in 5.
Yeah. And this isn't just, an occasional lapse in judgment. It's a systemic behavioral pattern that really impacts their careers, their finances, their relationships.
That's a huge portion of the population.
It is. And for the other 80% of us, while it might not be this chronic clinical trait, almost everyone engages in severe, paralyzing delay on a regular basis.
Especially when it comes to the things that actually matter most in their lives.
Exactly.
So that is the core mission for this deep dive. Today, we are going to completely dismantle everything you think you know about procrastination.
It's so needed.
Because we all do it. The smartest, most driven people in the world do it. And yet, it's almost universally misunderstood.
Completely misunderstood by the people suffering through it, by the managers watching them do it.
Oh, and especially misunderstood by the thousands of productivity gurus online trying to sell you a $50 Notion template to fix it.
Right. I mean, the entire cultural narrative needs to be flipped. We have to introduce a massive paradigm shift right here at the very beginning of our conversation.
Okay, lay it on us.
So the most common framing in our society, like the water we all swim in, is that procrastination is a time management problem.
Right, like a scheduling error.
Exactly. When you're sitting there at 4:00 p.m. reorganizing your desk, the story you tell yourself is, I'm inefficient, I'm disorganized, I lack discipline.
I just need a better planner.
Yeah, I just need a better schedule. But decades of rigorous psychological and neurobiological research point to a completely different reality.
Which is what?
We mistakenly frame this as a lack of organization or willpower, when in reality, procrastination is an emotional regulation problem.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because that is a massive statement.
It changes everything.
They're treating it like a calendar issue when it's actually an emotional regulation issue.
Precisely.
I want to promise you, the listener, that by the end of this deep dive, you're not just going to walk away with a list of cheap life hacks.
No, we're going way deeper than that.
You're going to have a profound structural understanding of your own brain, your own emotional processing, and exactly why your biology is hijacking your best intentions at 4:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
And to get to that understanding, we really need to dive deep into the specific mechanics of this great misunderstanding.
Because treating it like a time management problem doesn't just, fail to fix the issue.
No, it actively exacerbates it and makes it worse.
So let's look at the foundational science here. There are two researchers in particular, Fuchsia Suroy at the University of Sheffield and Timothy Pekel at Carleton University.
Incredible researchers.
Yeah, they've spent years peeling back the layers of this behavior. And their core argument is that we do not avoid tasks because the tasks are inherently hard or because they take a lot of time.
Right, and their findings completely revolutionized the field.
So what did they find?
They demonstrated that we avoid these tasks because engaging with them forces us to experience negative emotions that our brains desperately want to escape.
Oh, wow.
It is never the spreadsheet itself that you're running from.
Because the spreadsheet is just a grid on a screen.
Exactly. It's completely neutral. What you're actually running from is the emotional freight attached to that specific spreadsheet.
So the Tuesday afternoon report isn't just a report.
No, never.
It's the underlying fear of being judged by your boss. It's that creeping imposter syndrome. The anxiety of not knowing if your skills are actually good enough.
Or the intense discomfort of uncertainty. Like maybe you don't even know where to find the data you need.
Right. Or in some cases, it's just the sheer grinding existential boredom of a highly tedious administrative task.
And this is exactly where the biological mechanism of procrastination kicks in. Specifically a concept called short-term mood repair.
Short-term mood repair. Okay, how does that work?
So when you look at that report, your brain registers a spike in negative emotion. Fear, dread, incompetence. Your biological systems do not like experiencing negative emotions. They interpret them as an immediate physical threat to your well-being.
Like a predator in the bushes.
Basically, yeah. So when you make the subconscious pivot to reorganize your desk instead of opening the document, your brain experiences a rush of immediate relief.
Because you've stepped away from the threat.
Exactly. You have successfully distanced yourself, you've set aside the task and all of its emotional baggage, the anxiety plummets.
And you get a little hit of dopamine from the physical act of cleaning the desk.
Yeah, you have successfully repaired your mood in the short term.
And I mean, let's be honest, it feels incredibly good.
It really does.
For about 5 or 10 minutes, your desk is sparkling clean, you've ordered your physical environment, and you feel entirely in control of your life.
But the architecture of that short-term mood repair is ultimately destructive.
Because the relief is incredibly fleeting.
Right. You haven't eliminated the threat, you've just looked away from it.
And the Friday deadline still exists in objective reality.
Exactly. So when the anxiety inevitably returns, it doesn't just return at its original baseline. It returns amplified and multiplied.
Because now you've burned through a significant portion of your safety buffer. You've lost time.
Yeah. The original emotional burden, like the fear of judgment, the uncertainty, it's still sitting there waiting for you. But now you have bolted a massive ticking time pressure component onto it.
So you've effectively compounded the negative emotions. The anxiety is now significantly higher at 5:00 p.m. than it was at 4:00 p.m.
It's a vicious cycle.
Let me try to put this in perspective with an analogy, because I think this is so important.
Go for it.
So our limbic system, which controls these emotional responses, is essentially acting like a highly sensitive, maybe slightly malfunctioning smoke detector.
I like that.
The smoke detector's only job is to keep you alive. But it can't tell the difference between a minor puff of smoke from a burnt piece of toast, which in this case is the spreadsheet,
Right.
and the entire house being engulfed in actual lethal flames. It just senses discomfort and sounds the alarm.
It just screams danger.
Yeah. And our societal response to this alarm is to, go buy a new calendar.
Which makes zero sense when you think about it.
It's insane. Using a shiny new planner or a complex color-coded task app to cure procrastination is like trying to treat a broken bone with cough syrup.
Yes.
You're applying a completely irrelevant intervention to the wrong biological system. You can color-code your Notion board until your fingers bleed, but a calendar app does not possess the capacity to process your fear of failure.
Not at all. The calendar simply serves as a reminder of when you are contractually obligated to feel the fear. It offers absolutely zero assistance in actually navigating the fear itself.
Wait, okay, I'm struggling to square that with the reality of just, having an impossible workload.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because sometimes a task really is just too long. Like, if my boss hands me a project that realistically requires 10 solid hours of deep work, and it's due in 5 hours,
Yeah.
my avoidance feels less like a deep-seated emotional regulation issue and more like basic, unavoidable math. If the schedule is physically impossible, How is my delay in emotional response?
It's a fair question. The math might be impossible, but your reaction to the math is entirely emotional.
Can we explain that?
Think about it analytically. If a task requires 10 hours and you only have 5, the purely logical, non-emotional response would be to sit down, work intensely for those 5 available hours, make as much progress as humanly possible, and then rationally communicate the shortfall to your boss.
Right, you just say, hey, I optimized the time and completed 50%.
Exactly. But we know that is rarely what the procrastinator actually does.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, the procrastinator looks at the 10-hour task, looks at the 5-hour window, feels a massive, crushing wave of anxiety about the impossibility of the constraint, goes into a state of panic or paralysis, and avoids the task entirely.
And they end up watching YouTube for 4 hours and frantically throwing together pure garbage in the final hour.
Exactly. They turn 5 available hours into 1. The emotional overwhelm generated by the perception of the time constraint is what causes the paralysis, not the physical math of the schedule itself.
The emotion is the barrier.
Always.
Man, that reframes everything. We misdiagnose the problem entirely. We think we need a tighter schedule or a new time-blocking technique when we actually need to process our physiological response to the work.
Yes.
Since we're establishing that this is a biological process rather than a scheduling error, we need to look under the hood.
Let's do it.
Where is this emotional avoidance physically taking place in our bodies? Let's take a look at the neurobiology.
We have to map out the geography of the brain here, because there is a literal biological tug of war happening inside your skull every single time you sit down to work.
Tug of war.
Yeah, we're dealing with 2 highly specialized, very different evolutionary systems, and they are competing for control of your behavior.
Okay, so on one side of the rope, we have the limbic system.
Right. And the limbic system is ancient in evolutionary terms. It's the emotional core of the brain. It contains structures like the amygdala,
That's fast, right?
lightning speed, and it is entirely emotionally and instinctively driven. Its primary directive is immediate survival and immediate experience.
So it doesn't care about my quarterly review.
It absolutely does not care about your 5-year career plan or your quarterly review. It wants comfort right now. It wants a dopamine reward right now. It wants relief from perceived stress right now.
Right.
So when it senses the emotional discomfort of that difficult report, that burnt toast smoke we talked about, it registers it as an acute threat that must be avoided immediately.
It's basically the part of the brain throwing a tantrum, screaming, flee the spreadsheet, seek the immediate comfort of the snack pantry.
That is exactly what it's doing. And pulling on the other side of the rope, trying to maintain some semblance of order, is the prefrontal cortex.
The newer part of the brain.
Structurally newer, more evolved, located right behind your forehead. It is significantly slower to process information, but it is driven by logic, reason, and abstract thought.
So it's the responsible one.
Very responsible. It handles our long-term planning, our complex decision-making, and most importantly, it is the seat of delayed gratification.
So the prefrontal cortex is the weary adult in the room.
Yes.
It's the part that's calmly trying to explain, like, look, I know this report is tedious, but it's vital for our career trajectory. Finishing it will alleviate the anxiety entirely.
And honestly, if we just write the first paragraph, the dread will start to dissipate.
Exactly.
So procrastination at a fundamental neurological level is simply the behavior that results when the limbic system overpowers the prefrontal cortex and wins the tug of war.
The toddler beats the adult.
Right. And what is absolutely crucial to understand about this daily battle is that it is not a fair fight.
Why not?
Because the limbic system is automatic and relentless. It doesn't get tired. But the prefrontal cortex requires significant metabolic energy to operate.
Oh, so drains.
It drains fast. Its grip on the rope becomes incredibly weak when we're tired, when we are under physical stress, when our blood sugar drops, or when we are experiencing high cognitive overload.
Which explains so much about our daily patterns.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you've been in back-to-back meetings since 8:00 a.m. and you finally sit down at 4:00 p.m. to do your deep work, your prefrontal cortex is essentially out of battery.
It's completely tapped out.
It doesn't have the juice left to fight off the limbic system's demand for a break.
And that creates a deeply vicious cycle. Procrastination becomes significantly more likely under high-stress conditions.
Just when you need to focus the most.
Exactly. Just when the external need to overcome the avoidance is at its absolute highest, say, the night before a massive deadline. The cognitive resources in your prefrontal cortex required to win that tug of war are totally depleted by the stress itself.
So the exhausted adult simply drops the rope and gives in to the screaming toddler.
You got it.
The mechanics of that tug-of-war are fascinating, but if we're talking about neurobiology, we have to talk about how the brain visualizes the timeline of these tasks.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting.
Because it's not just a battle between now and later, it's about how our brain literally conceptualizes the later. I want to dive into the research of Hal Hershfield.
Yes, Hirschfield's work at UCLA. This represents some of the most groundbreaking neuroimaging research in the entire field of psychology.
Set the stage for us. What did he do?
He wasn't just asking people how they felt about the future. He was physically looking at their brains inside functional magnetic resonance imaging machines, fMRI scanners. He wanted to see the specific neural activation patterns when people think about their future selves. The version of you that actually has to deal with the consequences of your Tuesday afternoon choices.
The future me who has to wake up on Thursday morning and write a 20-page report in a blind panic.
Right. So to understand the experiment, you have to understand the medial prefrontal cortex. This is a region of the brain that lights up heavily consuming oxygenated blood, which researchers call the BOL-D signal when you think about yourself.
So if I'm in the scanner and you ask me to describe my personality, this area glows.
Exactly. But if I ask you to describe a famous celebrity like Matt Damon or Natalie Portman or a complete stranger, the activity in that specific region drops significantly.
Okay.
So the brain has a very clear physical signature for self and an entirely different signature for other.
It physically maps the concept of identity.
Precisely. So Hirschfield puts his subjects in the scanner and gives them prompts. He asks them to think about themselves in the present. The self region lights up.
Makes sense.
He asks them to think about a celebrity. The region dims. Then he asks them to think about themselves 10 years in the future. And the data from the scans is staggering.
I cannot get over this part. What happens to the brain?
When the subjects imagined their future selves, the neural activation patterns in their medial prefrontal cortex did not look like the patterns of when they thought about themselves in the present.
It dimmed.
The activity dimmed. The physical activation pattern matched almost exactly how they thought about a stranger.
A stranger.
A literal stranger.
So when I say to myself on Tuesday afternoon, I'm just too tired right now, I will definitely do the report tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
My brain is literally biologically acting as if I am assigning this highly stressful, career-defining work to some random guy I just met at the bus stop.
That is the biological reality. We do not experience our future self as an extension of our present consciousness. We experience them neurologically as someone else entirely.
I am really trying to wrap my head around the empathy gap here.
It's a big gap.
Because even if my brain truly, fundamentally believes that future me is a stranger, why don't I feel at least a little bit of compassion for that stranger?
Right.
I mean, I consider myself a decent person. I wouldn't wish a caffeine-fueled, panic-stricken all-nighter on a random guy on the street. Why am I so incredibly callous and willing to dump all of this stress onto the Thursday night version of myself?
It's a profound philosophical and biological question, but it's not that you're a sociopath who lacks empathy entirely.
Good to know.
It's that the limbic system's overwhelming immediate demand for mood repair simply overrides any abstract theoretical empathy your prefrontal cortex might be able to generate for a stranger.
The need to feel better right now is just too strong.
The immediate relief of avoiding the spreadsheet right now is so intensely rewarding to the brain that it completely crowds out your concern for the future. We treat this future self with a level of ruthlessness we would never accept for our present self. We rationalize it. We tell ourselves, oh, future me will have a good night's sleep. Future me will be so much more motivated. Future me will figure it out because future me is someone else's problem.
That is chilling. The disconnect between the present self and the future self isn't just a metaphor. It is the core mechanism of the delay.
Exactly.
If the brain genuinely views future you as a stranger, it explains why we're so comfortable dumping our stress on tomorrow.
It explains everything.
But because we're all avoiding different types of emotional pain, that avoidance doesn't look the same for everyone, right? Like the way I avoid a tedious spreadsheet looks biologically and behaviorally different than how you avoid a high-stakes creative project. Not all delay is created equal.
Far from it. The field of procrastination research has actually developed a highly specific taxonomy of delay.
The taxonomy.
Yeah, there are several distinct core types of procrastination, and learning to diagnose which one you are actively experiencing in real time is the absolute prerequisite to overcoming it.
So you have to know your type.
If you don't know what kind of delay you're dealing with, you are flying blind, because the psychological intervention that cures one type will completely bounce off another.
Okay, let's walk through this taxonomy. Let's diagnose the delay and break down the 5 main types.
Sounds good.
The first, and arguably the most emotionally taxing, is anxiety-based procrastination.
Right. Anxiety-based procrastination occurs when the task at hand triggers a deep, visceral sense of performance anxiety.
Like what?
This is the fear of failure, the fear of external judgment, or the incredibly painful fear of the gap between what you want to produce and what you suspect you are actually capable of producing.
Oh, the imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome lives right here.
What I find so deeply heartbreaking about this specific type is the internal narrative of the procrastinator. People who suffer from anxiety-based delay almost always internalize it as a character flaw.
Always.
They look at their unwritten report and they tell themselves, I am just lazy, I lack drive. But the exact opposite is true.
Completely true.
They usually care enormously about the outcome of the work. That deep caring is exactly why starting the work feels like staring down the barrel of a loaded gun.
Yeah.
If they didn't care, there would be no anxiety.
The caring is the source of the threat. If the report dictates your chance at a promotion, your limbic system reads the writing of that report as an act of extreme danger.
Right.
And closely related to this is the second type, which is a highly specific, very damaging subtype of anxiety, the perfectionist procrastinator.
Ah, the perfectionists. They are trapped in a paradox.
How so?
Well, they refuse to start because as long as they don't start, the project cannot be flawed.
Exactly. If you do not begin the project, it remains a state of pure, untarnished potential. It exists flawlessly in your imagination. You are an unproven genius.
But the very second you start,
The moment your fingers hit the keyboard, it becomes imperfect. You are forced to confront the limits of your own current ability.
that is so true.
For the dysfunctional perfectionist, an unstarted project is a safe harbor. A started, imperfect, struggling draft is a devastating verdict on their inherent self-worth.
That is incredibly heavy. So the first 2 types are rooted in profound emotional threat. But the third type is a completely different species of delay, boredom-based procrastination.
With boredom-based procrastination, there is no threat to your identity. There is no fear of failure or judgment. The task is simply pure, unadulterated tedium.
So data entry.
Doing your taxes, filling out compliance forms, yeah. The problem here is not anxiety management. The failure point is purely attention regulation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Our brains are novelty-seeking machines, and the constant frictionless availability of highly stimulating alternatives right next to your work is just impossible to ignore.
It's like being forced to walk on a treadmill for 3 hours while staring at a blank beige wall.
That sounds awful.
Right. There is absolutely no fear associated with the treadmill, but it is agonizingly dull.
Yeah.
And right next to the treadmill is a giant screen playing a high-speed car chase, which represents YouTube or social media.
And your brain just wants the car chase.
Your brain is starved for dopamine, so it simply steps off the treadmill.
A perfect distinction. And then we move to the fourth type, which is incredibly common in the modern knowledge economy, overwhelm-based procrastination.
Oh, this one I know intimately. This is the absolute physical and mental paralysis caused by the sheer scale, complexity, or total lack of clarity of a task.
You're just frozen.
You are not necessarily afraid of the work, and you might not even find it boring, but you genuinely, honestly do not know where the first step is.
And for the human brain, ambiguity is intensely uncomfortable. Not knowing where or how to start feels significantly worse, cognitively speaking, than simply refusing to start at all.
Because every potential entry point you consider seems wrong, or incomplete, or likely to lead to a dead end.
Right. Your brain cannot successfully chunk the task into manageable pieces, so the system crashes, you freeze.
If boredom is the treadmill, overwhelm is like being dropped via helicopter at the base of a massive, craggy mountain, without a map, without a compass, and being told to climb.
You wouldn't know what to do.
You just stare at the rock face, entirely immobilized by the scale of the demand. They both stop you from moving, but the internal experience is entirely different.
Which brings us to the fifth and final major category. Avoidance of discomfort.
Now, how does this differ from the anxiety we talked about in type 1?
Avoidance of discomfort happens when we indefinitely dodge a task, not because we fear failure, but because the task requires a very specific, highly aversive sensory or emotional experience.
Like what? Give me an example.
It's often not the entirety of the project, but one unavoidable component of it. For example, the task might require interpersonal conflict, like making a phone call to fire a vendor. Or it requires public exposure, vulnerability, or navigating a Kafkaesque, mind-numbing bureaucratic phone tree to dispute a medical bill.
I would put that off for months.
Most people do. The task is delayed for months because the specific flavor of discomfort it demands is the exact flavor the individual finds most deeply intolerable. It is an aversive conditioning response.
So if I am sitting at my desk at 4.0 Vero on Tuesday, the absolute first step is identifying which of these 5 buckets I'm currently drowning
Yes, diagnosis is key.
in. Am I anxious? Am I perfectionistic? Am I bored? Am I overwhelmed? Or am I avoiding a specific pain? But let me ask you to complicate this a bit.
Sure.
Is it possible for these to overlap? Like, could someone experience a hybrid procrastination? Say, a task that is simultaneously agonizingly tedious, but also somehow triggers intense perfectionism.
Oh, without question. In fact, hybrid procrastination scenarios create the most intractable paralysis of all.
Really? How so?
Imagine a young academic applying for a highly competitive career-making grant. Gathering all the required historical financial documentation and formatting the citations is pure grinding tedium.
So that's boredom-based delay.
Right. But writing the actual personal statement, the narrative that must convince the board of their brilliance, that triggers massive perfectionist and anxiety-based delay.
Oh, man.
When you face a hybrid task, your limbic system is essentially trapped in a room with multiple different fire alarms all screaming at the exact same time.
And because we never stop to actually analyze the alarms, because we are so rarely taught to ask ourselves, am I bored, am I scared, or am I overwhelmed?
We don't ask them.
We just blindly reach into the standard societal toolbox for a solution. We reach for generic productivity advice, which, based on everything we just discussed about emotional regulation, is completely fundamentally broken.
It is worse than broken. Much of the standard advice out there aggressively treats the surface symptom while completely ignoring or even aggravating the root cause.
Let's spend some time dissecting these failed solutions, the things we try over and over again that actually make the shame spiral worse.
The graveyard of productivity advice.
Exactly. The biggest one, the granddaddy of all productivity advice. Just do it. The enduring myth of sheer willpower.
Society has this intense bias toward treating procrastination as a moral failing or a willpower deficit. The advice is always, just show some grit. Just have more discipline. Buckle down.
Like it's a character issue.
Right. But if procrastination were simply a willpower problem, willpower-based solutions would actually work. And decades of psychological research consistently demonstrate that they do not.
So discipline doesn't work.
People who naturally score high in trait self-control, like the naturally disciplined people, they don't actually procrastinate less because they have the sheer strength to power through misery.
Why do they procrastinate less then?
They procrastinate less because they arrange their lives and their habits to get into fewer situations that tempt the limbic system in the first place.
Environmental design.
Exactly. Telling someone whose brain is currently paralyzed by a massive emotional threat response to just do it is exactly like telling someone having a clinical panic attack to just relax.
It's totally insulting to the biological reality of what their nervous system is experiencing. The instruction, just do it, offers absolutely no mechanism for how to do it.
None at all.
Okay, failed solution number 2, the elaborate productivity systems.
We touched on this with the calendar app, task management software, strict time blocking methods, highly detailed digital planners.
These people love.
They do. And these tools are fantastic for the logistics of work. They are great at telling you what needs to be done and when, but they completely fail to address the internal emotional experience of doing the work.
The irony of this specific trap is so painful to witness. I know people, and to be honest, I have absolutely been this person, who will spend 3 uninterrupted, intensely focused hours color-coding a Notion board, building custom relational databases for their tasks, setting up automated Slack reminders, and designing the perfect workflow.
All to avoid what?
All to avoid a writing assignment that would take exactly 30 minutes to complete. The system itself becomes an elaborate camouflage for the procrastination. It feels incredibly productive. You look busy, anyone walking past your desk, but you are actually just hiding from the emotional threat inside a beautifully designed app.
Because building the system does not trigger the anxiety. Reorganizing the database is safe. Doing the writing is dangerous.
That's such a trap.
It is. But the third failed solution is by far the most damaging of all. It isn't the apps or the willpower myths. It is the deeply ingrained habit of self-punishment.
The guilt, the shame, the internal monologue of I am an absolute failure for wasting today.
Yes. We actively punish ourselves for procrastinating. We weaponize guilt, intense self-criticism, and shame, believing that if we make ourselves feel bad enough, we will eventually be forced to change.
Because that's what we're taught, right? Be hard on yourself.
Exactly. But psychologically and neurologically, this is wildly counterproductive. I want to walk you through a truly fascinating piece of research by Dr. Claire Adams at the University of New Orleans.
Okay, what did she do?
She wanted to test the actual measurable effect of self-forgiveness on future behavior.
Let's break down the methodology. How do you actually study the effect of forgiveness on procrastination?
Adams and her team looked at a large cohort of university students studying for their midterms. First, they let the students take their first major exam of the semester.
Standard midterm.
Right. Afterward, they surveyed the students to determine two things: how much they had procrastinated studying for that specific exam, and crucially, how much they had forgiven themselves for that procrastination.
So they measured their levels of self-compassion versus self-punishment.
Exactly. Then they waited. They tracked those same students weeks later to see how they behaved leading up to the second major exam.
And the data completely inverted our cultural expectations, didn't it?
Completely inverted it.
The students who let themselves off the hook for messing up the first time actually started earlier on the final.
Exactly. The students who actively forgave themselves for procrastinating on the first exam actually procrastinated significantly less on the second exam. And those who reported high levels of guilt and self-blame after the first exam were much more likely to repeat the severe procrastination cycle on the second exam.
That breaks the entire societal narrative that guilt equals accountability. We are raised to believe that if you don't feel terrible about failing, you won't care enough to fix it.
But the data says otherwise.
How does self-forgiveness physically change the behavior? What is the actual mechanism?
The mechanism comes back to our core premise: emotional regulation. Adams found that self-forgiveness effectively lowered the affective burden, the negative emotional weight associated with the act of studying.
So it made the task lighter.
Yes. When the students who forgave themselves sat down to study for the second exam, they were only facing the difficulty of the material itself. They didn't have to carry the heavy, paralyzing secondary weight of feeling like a failure or the shame of their past actions.
That makes so much sense.
The task was lighter. Conversely, the students who wallowed in guilt had essentially added more negative emotion to the task, making their limbic system scream even louder the next time they tried to open a textbook.
That is a profound realization. Shame and guilt aren't corrective measures. They are the actual fuel keeping the procrastination cycle running.
They are the fuel.
If shame and willpower are throwing gasoline on the fire, we need to know what the water is. We need to rebuild this toolkit from the ground up, discarding the things that don't work and leaning entirely into evidence-based solutions.
Let's build a better toolbox.
Yep.
And based on what we just discussed, the absolute first tool we must pull out is the exact opposite of shame: self-compassion.
This leans heavily on the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, who pioneered self-compassion research, and Cyril's specific application of it to delay.
Yes. Across multiple studies and massive data sets, the most consistent finding in modern procrastination research is that high self-compassion reduces procrastination far more effectively than strict self-criticism.
And how are we defining self-compassion here?
It's defined as treating yourself with the exact same objective kindness, curiosity, and understanding that you would naturally offer to a struggling friend.
Which, I have to admit, feels deeply counterintuitive to the overachiever mindset. Offering yourself compassion when you are blowing a deadline feels like giving up. It feels like lowering your standards.
It feels that way because we confuse compassion with complacency. But look at the mechanism we just discussed with Adams's research. Self-compassion aggressively lowers the emotional barrier to entry.
Because you're dropping the baggage.
Exactly. When you stop managing a toxic internal monologue of guilt and shame on top of the task's inherent difficulty, the task simply becomes less threatening to the limbic system.
You're not fighting a two-front war anymore. You're not fighting the spreadsheet and your own self-worth. You're just doing the spreadsheet.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's tool number one. What's next?
Once we have lowered the internal temperature with self-compassion, the second tool is about directly dismantling the external emotional barrier of the task itself. We call it reducing the emotional cost.
This is where we bring in Dr. B.J. Fogg's behavior design research from Stanford.
Yes, Fogg's model is brilliant in its simplicity. He argues that for any behavior to occur, you need motivation, ability, and a prompt.
Okay.
Because procrastination is fundamentally about avoiding the high emotional cost of a task, you have to manipulate the ability lever. You have to make the emotional experience of starting so impossibly cheap, so ridiculously easy, that the limbic system doesn't even bother to register it as a threat.
So you shrink the task.
Fogg calls this finding the smallest viable version of a behavior.
Walk us through what that actually looks like in practice.
Yeah.
Because writing a report is not small.
Let's use a classic physical example first. If your goal is to go to the gym and you are currently paralyzed on the couch feeling lethargic, the task go to the gym for an hour is far too emotionally and physically expensive.
Yeah, that feels like a mountain.
The threshold for activation is too high. Your limbic system rejects it instantly. So using Fogg's model, you radically shrink the task. Your new only goal is not to work out. Your goal is simply to put on my gym clothes.
That is the entire commitment.
That's it.
And returning to our Tuesday 4:00 p.m. scenario, the smallest viable step isn't write the executive summary. The step is literally just open a blank Word document, save it to the desktop, and type today's date.
Right. The commitment becomes so laughably small that the emotional friction required to comply with it drops lower than the emotional friction of sitting there feeling guilty.
That is so clever.
Fogg's research demonstrates that the smallest viable entry point is the single most reliable way to initiate action.
Because motivation follows action.
Exactly. Action almost never follows motivation. We wait to feel motivated to start, but the brain actually generates the motivation after it senses you are already in motion.
Okay, I love the theory here, but I have a major physiological pushback.
Hit me.
Let's say I'm sitting on the couch. I tell myself, I am only putting on my gym socks. I am not going to the gym. Doesn't my prefrontal cortex know I am actively running a scam on my own limbic system? My conscious brain is fully aware that the socks are a Trojan horse to get me on the treadmill. How does the smallest viable step actually bypass an active conscious brain that knows it's a trap?
It is a brilliant question, and it gets to the heart of how our brains process information. The answer is fascinating. It works because the limbic system suffers from a kind of extreme myopia.
Extreme myopia,
Yeah.
meaning it's short-sighted.
Very. It is entirely reactive to the very next immediate stimulus. Even if your higher reasoning, your prefrontal cortex, knows full well it's a trap designed to get you to the gym, the limbic system only has the bandwidth to process the immediate sensory requirement presented to it.
Which is just putting on socks.
Right. I just have to put on these cotton socks. Putting on socks is not a threat. The alarm bells remain silent.
And here is the crucial part.
Yes, once the socks are on, the physical state of your body has fundamentally changed. You have crossed the threshold of activation, the sheer physics of momentum take over, and your brain adjusts its baseline before the limbic system realizes it has been tricked into a workout.
You are literally hacking your own biological threat response. I love it. Okay, moving to tool number 3, implementation intentions.
This is drawn from the extensive research of Peter Gollwitzer at NYU. An implementation intention is a very specific type of planning.
Like setting a goal.
No, it is not a goal. A goal is, I will work on the report tomorrow. An implementation intention is an if-then statement that specifies the exact when and where of a task.
So what does that sound like?
It sounds like this. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, when I sit down at my kitchen desk, I will open the report and write for 30 minutes.
It sounds almost too simple to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Does the data actually back up something that basic?
The data on this is arguably some of the strongest in behavioral psychology. Across hundreds of studies, Gollwitzer and others have demonstrated that creating these highly specific implementation intentions more than doubles the likelihood of actual follow-through compared to setting a general goal.
More than doubles your success rate. Just by locking in a time and a physical location. How does that work on a neurological level?
Because it completely removes decision fatigue at the critical moment of action.
Oh, decision fatigue.
Yeah. When you just say, I'll do it tomorrow, you wake up tomorrow and you have to expend massive amounts of cognitive energy negotiating with yourself.
Should I do it before breakfast? After the meeting? Maybe after lunch?
Exactly. Every negotiation is an opportunity for the limbic system to win. An implementation intention offloads the executive function to the environment. It links a specific environmental cue, like 9:000 a.m. at the desk, with an automatic behavior.
So you don't have to decide to work.
Right. The decision was already made yesterday by your prefrontal cortex. You are simply executing a pre-written script.
You bypass the limbic system entirely. because there is no choice to be made in the present moment.
Mm.
You just sit. Amazing. Let's look at tool number 4, which addresses the overwhelmed procrastinator, the Pomodoro technique.
This is a famous time management framework developed by Francesco Sciullo, but it is deeply rooted in cognitive psychology. The premise is simple. You set a timer for 25 minutes of singular focus, followed by a mandatory 5-minute break.
We hear about Pomodoro all the time, but from a psychological standpoint, why does that specific constraint, like exactly 25 minutes, work so effectively to break paralysis?
Because it aggressively exploits the brain's deep psychological preference for defined, bounded endpoints.
Bounded endpoints.
Yeah. When you look at a massive project, the implicit instruction you give yourself is work on this until it's done. To the human brain, done is a terrifying, ambiguous, and seemingly infinite horizon. It triggers massive overwhelm.
Because it feels like forever.
Exactly. But if the instruction is, work for exactly 25 minutes, and then you are absolutely, legally allowed to stop, regardless of what you have produced, the brain can handle 25 minutes.
It thrives on that boundary.
Right. The timer acts as a container for the anxiety, making it incredibly effective for fighting both overwhelm-based and boredom-based procrastination.
That makes total sense. It shrinks the mountain into a single step.
Yeah.
Tool number 5 moves away from tactics and into a slightly deeper psychological framework, connecting to purpose.
Yes. Cognitive psychology tells us that meaning actively reduces avoidance.
How so?
When people are able to connect a specific, tedious task to a much larger, highly valued purpose, like not just looking at the immediate output, but understanding why it actually matters to their core values, their team, or their community, they procrastinate significantly less. This relates to construal level theory.
How does finding meaning change the actual emotional valence of a task?
It changes how the brain evaluates the reward. If the task is just formatting an Excel sheet, the reward is low and the tedium is high, delay is likely.
But if you connect it to the purpose,
Right. If you say, this Excel sheet is the final step, ensuring my entire team gets their quarterly bonuses on time, the emotional weight shifts. You are no longer just fighting boredom. You are actively serving your team. The higher order value overrides the lower order limbic avoidance.
and finally, tool number 6, reducing temptation, rather than relying on our old, failed friend, willpower.
This brings us to the extensive research of Roy Baumeister on ego depletion and willpower. Baumeister's work revolutionized how we view self-control.
He's the researcher who did the famous radishes and chocolate chip cookies experiment, right?
Exactly. He brought hungry students into a room filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies. He put a plate of cookies and a bowl of radishes in front of them.
That is just cruel.
It is. Half were told they could eat the cookies. The other half were told they could only eat the radishes, forcing them to actively resist the temptation of the cookies. Afterward, he gave both groups an impossible geometric puzzle to solve.
Then what happened?
The students who were allowed to eat the cookies worked on the frustrating puzzle for nearly 20 minutes before giving up.
Okay.
The students who had to use their willpower to resist the cookies, the radish eaters, gave up on the puzzle after only 8 minutes. They had depleted their cognitive stamina.
So willpower is genuinely like a battery.
Yes. Willpower is a highly finite, rapidly depleting metabolic resource. Every single time you have to actively use your prefrontal cortex to resist picking up your phone or opening a new tab, you drain the battery.
And by the 20th time you resist, the battery is dead and you open Instagram.
Exactly. Therefore, the most effective strategy is to completely stop relying on internal intention and start shaping your external environment.
Which means introducing physical friction to your distractions. Put the phone in a completely different room. Use website blockers like Freedom or Cold Turkey on your laptop to physically lock you out of distracting sites.
Precisely. If the distraction is not in your immediate visual field, or if it requires significant effort to access, you do not have to expend precious willpower to resist it. Designing a distraction-free environment shapes your behavior far more reliably than internal discipline ever could.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at where we are. We have assembled this incredibly robust, scientifically backed, new toolbox.
This is a good toolbox.
We have self-compassion to lower the heat. We have Fogg's smallest viable steps to build momentum. We have Gallwitzer's intentions to bypass decision fatigue.
Yep.
We have 25-minute Pomodoro bursts to contain the overwhelm. We have meaning to drive us, and we have environmental design to protect our willpower.
These are incredibly effective mechanisms.
But there is a trap, isn't there? There's a very specific, culturally reinforced psychological trap that has the power to override every single one of these tools, particularly for the high achievers listening to this deep dive.
Yes. And it is the pervasive, deeply destructive trap of perfectionism.
We need to spend some real time exploring this hidden link between perfectionism and procrastination. Because unlike almost any other psychological hurdle, society absolutely loves a perfectionist.
We actively reward it. We put it on our resumes.
Right. When someone asks, what is your biggest weakness in a job interview, the classic humble brag answer is, well, I'm just too much of a perfectionist. We celebrate it as a virtue of high standards.
We do celebrate it, but the clinical reality is very different. Dysfunctional perfectionism is actually one of the most reliable, robust predictors of chronic, paralyzing procrastination.
Break that down for me. Why does wanting something to be great cause us to not do it at all?
Because dysfunctional perfectionism is not actually about high standards. It is a cognitive distortion that dictates that absolutely anything less than flawless execution is entirely unacceptable and represents a fundamental failure of the self.
Wow.
If you believe that deeply in your core, then you subconsciously realize that starting a task is the most dangerous, high-risk activity you can possibly engage in.
Because, as we touched on earlier, the unstarted project is safe.
Exactly safe.
As long as that screenplay or that business plan or that massive Tuesday afternoon report is just an idea floating around in my head, it is absolutely perfect. It is the best report ever conceived.
Right.
The started draft, however, is a verdict. It is physical, undeniable proof of my current limitations. I keep thinking of an untouched block of marble.
I love this analogy.
As long as I don't take a chisel to it, that block of marble could theoretically be Michelangelo's David. It holds infinite, perfect potential. But the exact second I make a mark on it, if my hand slips even a millimeter, it is no longer perfect.
Right here.
It is just a lumpy ruined rock.
That is a beautiful, deeply tragic, and entirely accurate metaphor for how the perfectionist brain operates. The perfectionist delays because the pain of seeing their own flawed output is worse than the pain of the impending deadline.
And this explains a paradox that confuses so many people, doesn't it?
Yes, it explains why we often procrastinate the absolute most on the things that actually matter the most to us.
Say more about that. Because on the surface, that makes no sense. You would think we would rush to do the things we care about.
Think about your daily life. The low-stakes tasks, taking out the trash, filling out a routine HR form, doing the dishes, those generally get done. Why?
Because you don't care if they're perfect.
Exactly. Your core identity isn't tied to the quality of the trash removal. You don't care if the trash is taken out perfectly. But the high-stakes tasks.
The creative passion project you've dreamt about for years.
Right. The career-defining presentation to the board, the deeply important, vulnerable conversation with your partner, those trigger massive, paralyzing avoidance precisely because they matter to your identity. If you fail at the passion project, it damages how you view yourself.
Oh man, that hits incredibly hard. We avoid the things we care about precisely because we care about them. The stakes are too high for the limbic system to tolerate the risk of imperfection.
Yes.
So how do we break the perfectionist trap? If all the tools bounce off of it, what is the antidote?
The antidote requires a fundamental cognitive restructuring. It requires fully internalizing a new operational mantra. Done is better than perfect.
Done is better than perfect.
And this is a crucial distinction. This is not a counsel of mediocrity. We are not telling people to do bad work or lower their ultimate standards.
So what are we telling them?
We are trying to teach the brain that a rough draft is not a failure. A terrible first draft is simply the raw, messy material from which good work is eventually sculpted. You cannot edit a blank page.
Done is better than perfect isn't an excuse. It is just an accurate, mechanical description of how quality work actually gets produced in the real world.
Exactly. You have to give yourself permission to be a beginner, to rake garbage to make the lumpy rock. Only then can the prefrontal cortex step in and refine it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, having said all of that about perfectionism, motivation, and emotional regulation, we do need to make a very vital pivot here in our deep dive. We have to be responsible and talk about when procrastination isn't just an emotional hurdle or a behavioral habit, but is actually a clinical symptom of a broader mental health condition.
Right. This is a crucial public service announcement because for a significant portion of the population, all the Pomodoro timers, self-compassion exercises, and implementation intentions in the world are not going to fix the root issue.
No, they won't.
We have to look at the overlaps with neurodivergence and mental health. Let's start with ADHD.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has a remarkably strong clinical association with chronic procrastination. But it is absolutely vital to understand that individuals with ADHD do not procrastinate because they lack motivation, because they don't care, or because they are trapped in a shame spiral.
So why do they delay?
They procrastinate because of physiological, structural differences in their brain's executive functioning.
Explain the difference between ADHD executive dysfunction and the limbic system tug of war we talked about earlier.
In a neurotypical brain, the prefrontal cortex can eventually rally the necessary dopamine to initiate a task and sustain attention on it, even if it's boring.
Okay.
In an ADHD brain, there is a baseline dysregulation of dopamine and norepinephrine. The neural mechanisms required for task initiation, working memory, and sustained forward planning are genuinely physically compromised. It is not an emotional avoidance, it is an executive failure to launch.
So treating ADHD-driven procrastination with standard behavioral advice, like just break it into smaller steps, is incredibly frustrating for the individual because the very mechanism required to execute those small steps is what is malfunctioning.
Precisely. The procrastination associated with ADHD rarely responds adequately to standard motivation-based interventions alone. It requires highly specific, tailored strategies, and very often it requires professional psychiatric support or medication to regulate the dopamine baseline.
That is so important to understand. Similarly, we have to look at how depression drives delay.
Yes.
How does clinical depression manifest as procrastination?
Primarily through a core symptom called anhedonia.
Anhedonia.
Yes. Anhedonia is the profound inability to feel pleasure, interest, or reward. This produces a type of paralyzing procrastination that has absolutely nothing to do with avoiding the discomfort of a task. It's the opposite.
Oh, because they don't care about the discomfort.
The depressed brain simply anticipates zero pleasure, zero relief, and zero satisfaction from either starting or finishing the task. There is no emotional return on investment. It's a flat line. So the individual does nothing.
So in that case, the procrastination is purely a symptom of the depression, not the root cause of the person's life difficulties. And what about anxiety disorders?
With generalized anxiety disorder or severe social anxiety, the threat response mechanism we discuss is dialed up to a pathological level.
Oh, it's the smoke detector, but it's blaring 204/7.
Exactly. A routine task triggers a clinical, overwhelming level of physiological panic, and the avoidance is a desperate, necessary coping mechanism just to survive the day.
So the core takeaway for the listener here is one of self-awareness. If your procrastination is significantly interfering with your life, if it is not just an occasional Tuesday afternoon slump, but a chronic systemic pattern that is actively destroying your job performance, severely damaging your relationships, and compromising your fundamental well-being, it might be time to seek professional clinical support, not just another productivity hack.
Absolutely. If the delay is systemic and destructive, you must treat the underlying condition. Procrastination is the fever, not the infection.
So we have covered an enormous amount of ground. We've gone from the evolutionary biology of the brain to the psychology of shame and self-forgiveness into the specific taxonomy of delay through a completely rebuilt toolkit and into the clinical realities of mental health.
It's a lot.
It is a lot, but I want to pull all the way back. I want to look at the macro level because this realization we landed on earlier that we procrastinate the absolute most on the things that mean the most to us, it brings us to a really profound, almost philosophical realization, doesn't it? About how we actually choose to live our lives.
It absolutely does. It forces us to elevate the conversation. We have to stop looking at procrastination merely as a corporate workplace efficiency issue and start looking at it as a deeply complex, universally human issue.
There's a philosophical dimension here that we rarely take seriously in our obsession with productivity.
Exactly.
It makes me think about the concept of the good life, the things we all say we want.
Right. When you sit down and truly think about what constitutes a good life, engaging in highly meaningful work, pursuing ambitious creative projects, building deep, vulnerable, and lasting relationships, undergoing profound personal growth, every single one of those pursuits inherently, unavoidably requires vulnerability.
You cannot do meaningful work without exposing yourself to the possibility of failure.
Exactly.
And as we know, vulnerability produces anxiety.
And as we have established for the last hour, anxiety triggers avoidance. It triggers the limbic system's demand for safety. It triggers procrastination.
Which means I have to ask a slightly bleak question.
Uh-oh.
Are we essentially doomed? Is human nature wired such that we are doomed to continually, reflexively run away from the exact things we love the most? Is the pursuit of a deeply meaningful life just an endless, exhausting cycle of paralyzing fear and avoidance?
It does not have to be a doom loop, but it is a fundamental paradox of the human condition that we simply have to accept. The good life is precisely the life that is most likely to produce the urge to procrastinate.
Because if you don't care, you don't avoid.
Right. If you are living a stagnant, entirely safe, meaningless life, you probably won't procrastinate much because nothing is at stake. But here's the profound cognitive shift. This paradox is not a reason to care less about your goals. It is a reason to understand your own psychological mechanics more clearly.
Because the anxiety we feel when we face the blank page isn't a malfunction.
Exactly. The anxiety that produces your procrastination is very often the exact same anxiety that is desperately trying to signal to you that something truly matters to your identity. Anxiety is not an enemy to be utterly defeated or eradicated. It is vital information to be processed.
It's a signal flare going up in the dark, telling you where your values lie.
Yes. The ultimate highest order skill in life is not figuring out how to achieve perfect productivity or how to never ever procrastinate again. That is a biologically impossible goal.
So what is the goal?
The ultimate skill is learning how to increase your window of tolerance for the emotional discomfort of starting.
It's learning to feel the very real fear of the blank page, to feel the terror of producing an imperfect, lumpy draft, to acknowledge the stranger living in your future, and to sit down and type the first sentence anyway.
It is the ability to begin despite the overwhelming fear of imperfection, to start the project fully, consciously knowing it will not be perfect, and to find a way to build a life where you are at peace with that messy reality.
That is beautiful.
That specific psychological skill, emotional tolerance, is infinitely more valuable and will take you infinitely further than any app, any schedule, or any productivity system ever invented.
Because emotional tolerance is the actual granular skill of showing up for the things you care about.
Yeah.
That is incredibly powerful.
It really is.
So, to wrap up this deep dive for you, the listener, we started this hour together, sitting at a messy desk on a Tuesday afternoon, wiping down a keyboard, feeling intensely guilty, paralyzed, and broken. But look at the landscape we've uncovered since then.
We've covered a lot.
You now know that your procrastination isn't a failure of your scheduling abilities, and it certainly isn't a lack of moral discipline. It is a biological protective mechanism driven by your ancient limbic system, trying to keep you safe from perceived emotional pain.
Yes.
You know about the stranger living in your future and how your brain treats future. You like a random guy on the street. You know why shame and guilt are literally the most counterproductive things you can do to yourself, and why self-compassion is actually your strongest tactical weapon.
It's the water for the fire.
Right. You know how to bypass the panic by tricking your brain with the absolute smallest viable steps, and how to protect your depleting willpower by designing a better environment.
You now possess a completely new, scientifically grounded lens through which to view your own daily behavior.
But as we close out, I want to leave you with one final thought. Something for you to really mull over the next time you find yourself staring blankly at a screen, endlessly scrolling through a feed, completely paralyzed by a task you know you need to do.
And that thought is this. The next time you find yourself frantically rearranging your desk instead of doing the work, do not stop and ask yourself, why am I so lazy?
Because that question is a dead end.
It is factually incorrect, and it leads only to shame. Instead, I want you to take a breath, look at the task you're avoiding, and ask yourself a much harder, much more illuminating question.
Which is,
why does this specific task matter so much to my identity that my brain is trying this hard to protect me from it? What if your procrastination isn't a character flaw at all? What if it is actually a compass pointing you directly toward the things you care about the absolute most?
a compass. Follow the fear because it points directly to what matters. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.